We all want to live a meaningful life, but meaning doesn't just happen. It has to be cultivated. And one element involved in this cultivation is developing a sense of purpose or direction, a compelling vision and ideal of what could be that you then head towards. Another way of thinking about it is in terms of time. We are perpetually inhabiting the present as it moves through the arrow of time. We know there's no altering the events of the past, and we know the future will be here soon enough. And if we can look a bit into that sea of potentiality, which the future is, and glimpse an image, a vision of what it is that would be the ideal future, what it is that we really want, then we know there's a chance that perhaps we could pull that ideal out of the future and into our experience of the present. We have words for a life which lacks this kind of vision. Aimless, purposeless, words strongly correlated with a life which is experienced as meaningless. On the positive side, there are immense feelings of satisfaction and fulfillment when we have identified an ideal to head towards and we feel that we are making reasonable progress towards it. But of course, identifying the need for having a vision is the easy part. Actually gaining that vision and defining that ideal to head towards is something else altogether and can be tricky in the details. For example, part of the difficulty is that having a vision of an ideal necessarily gets us into having to define what it is that is of real value. We are bombarded with images and messages trying to define for us what is of value. The number of digits following dollar signs, the square footage of a McMansion, the perkiness of any number of bodily parts, the status of the title written on our office door, the cachet of our alma mater, the magnitude of the applause at our performance. The advertisement of values and ideals is relentless. Deep down we sense that these kinds of things aren't what really matters, and yet how many of us nonetheless find these kinds of things as the actual ideals we devote the bulk of our daily energies heading towards? Absent some more compelling vision, these have a tendency to become our default vision because they are the telos, the purpose, the end of the story that our consumerist society moves us to participate in. And herein lies a powerful tool that can help us form a truly compelling vision. The recognition that whether we like it or not, we are all living inside of a story, unfolding right now as we speak. And absent a conscious choosing to participate in a grand and noble story, we may just be living in somebody else's story unawares and playing a bit part at that. There is a clarifying power that comes from zooming out and seeing this process of developing a vision as the process of crafting a story to enter into, because we all seem to inherently know the nature of a good story. They captivate us almost more than anything else, while the bad ones bore us quickly. If we can identify a sufficiently compelling story to participate in, our very lives become compelling. So what is the nature of your current story? Is it one that your posterity will tell for generations? Or, if we're honest, is it boring, forgettable, or sad? And how about the story of your family? Because this applies at every level: individual, familial, community, world. I used to think that it was noble to live a quiet life, playing it safe and doing everything according to expectations. And then I realized there wasn't a single person I admired, whether historical, ancestral, fictional, or scriptural, who lived like this. Every single noble person that I could think of didn't live quietly or safely. It doesn't mean that they sought fame and fortune either, or traveled far and wide, but we all know that the good stories contain danger, mischief, risk, suffering, discomfort, rising, falling, rising even higher, death and rebirth, calls to adventure, disillusion, and reconciliation. And the greatest stories are of people who lived in devotion and sacrifice to something grander and greater than themselves, for which they were willing to die or even to live. The best stories, such as Lord of the Rings or the Bible, involve characters playing their part in a much grander narrative than their individual life, living in devotion to the bedrock values that have stood the test of time, such as that which is good, beautiful, just, and true. I can't think of a single great story that involved obtaining a McMansion or cosmetic surgery as the high point or telos of the story. An example of how fairly regular people like you and me can nonetheless choose to place themselves in powerful stories is found within the book A Million Miles in a Thousand Years by Donald Miller, from which much inspiration for this essay came. One chapter of this book profiles a normal family who gained a vision by imagining a compelling story their family could participate in. And this family thought it would be a good story to personally get to know the heads of state of the earth. And so they had the gall and the gumption to send letters to 1,500 of these heads of state asking if their family could visit them and interview them and ask what the head of state cared about most. Nearly all the heads of state did not respond, but some did. And this family spent months traveling to different countries and developing close personal relationships with these interesting people. No movie will probably be made about this, but certainly this family experienced a great deal of meaning living out this story, and the story will inspire and influence their posterity for generations. Noble and beautiful stories like this lie in the potentiality of our homes, neighborhoods, and societies. Perhaps some of you already realize the current story you are living in is a bad one, but here's the good news about that. Think about it. Every great story has these kinds of moments. So just take where you are and imagine what would have to happen from here to resolve into a compelling story. And there you have a vision, an ideal to head towards. And the next step is simply the next step the main character would take in the story, because you are that protagonist. Of course, there's limitations to all of this. For example, you have to be willing to live the compelling story you imagine, so keep on working on iterations until you find a version that you are willing to go through the inevitable discomfort and sacrifice that every great story entails. But here's how it works. There are stories that are so compelling and meaningful that the suffering is worth it in them. The suffering doesn't become easier, but you become more willing to bear it as a participant in that story. You also might consider starting with smaller scale stories and working up to greater ones. And Donald Miller does a great job of showing how he did just this in his book. Remember that no story turns out how the characters think it will in the beginning. Gaining this kind of story vision just gets you into the story, gives you an initial vision. But stories tend to have a life of their own once you choose to enter into them. The divine in us and around us wants us to live beautiful and noble stories, to gain the vision that comes coupled with them. And I invite you to take the time to ask what might be the beautiful story vision that lies in the potentiality of your future, to listen to the inevitable response with an openness to the unexpected, uncomfortable, and often dangerous nature such answers sometimes entail, to write down these answers into the concreteness of word, and then to take that first step to enter into that grand and beautiful story.